Mother Teresa believed that changing the world was simple. She said, if you love until it hurts, there can be no more hurt, only more love. Tonight on Full Focus, we're taking a look at baseball great Fred Hutchinson and a legacy of love that continues to change the world. Fred Hutchinson is one of baseball's enduring legends. His dedication and competitive spirit made him a winner. His strength of character and ability to inspire made him larger than life. He was a man for whom it seemed victory was a foregone conclusion. But for all his heroics on the field, it was the battle he couldn't win and the undying love of his brother that would define his legacy.
Everybody loves a story about the local boy made good. And you have to go back to a time in the 1930s when there were no Mariners. Fred was clearly the star of the Franklin High School baseball team. You would see headlines almost every day during the season, Hutch this, Hutch that, for a high school kid.
Fred Hutchinson is a Seattle success story, a Cinderella story as far as his life and his baseball life and what he's meant to the city for many years. A prep star out of Franklin High School where he won 60 games and took the team to 2 city championships and signs immediately with the brand new Seattle Rainiers ball club. He won the 25 games for the Rainiers in their first season in 1938, and he was a tremendously hot property, a hot prospect for the major leagues. So he was really the talk of baseball in the fall and winter in 1938.
And after just that one stellar year, the teams were bidding over him and he signed on with the Detroit Tigers.
He was a big giant of a man. They called him the Bear, and it just suited him so well because he was just a big, fit guy and very burly.
He was somebody we don't see today. He was a real combination player. He was known as somebody who you didn't want to face if you were batting. You didn't even have to have a pitch thrown at you to be intimidated at the plate by this guy. He was a great pitcher, but he also was a great batter. He often would be used as a pinch hitter. He pitched in a World Series. His manager for Detroit in the 40s said that if he had one game that he needed to win, he would pitch Hutch for that game. He had that kind of reputation.
He was just a fiercely determined person to succeed and to do well and to have everyone around him do well. And he didn't lead by berating people and constantly sniping at them, but just he led by, really basically the strength of his character.
That Hutchinson family was so determined. Every one of them in their own way were just so determined and never took no for an answer. Anything was possible. And you just went out and did what you had to do, and you would make it possible.
The Hutchinson family was a very well-regarded family in Seattle. And Fred became the best known Hutchinson because of his baseball. It's not often that a player commands the kind of respect that at age 32 to be called upon to be a major league manager. Detroit was in the basement. They were doing very poorly and they needed somebody to kind of get them going the other direction. And Fred had been on the team for a dozen years and was well respected, and he did move the team up 2 or 3 notches in the standings.
He did really seem to command respect from all the players everywhere he went, and he didn't have a style of shouting down people or derision or embarrassing his players when they did something wrong. He had very, very high standards, but he would pull his players aside to talk with them when he wanted things to be done differently, never embarrass them in front of their teammates. And they just wanted to perform really well for him because they respected him so much as a manager and as a person. He had taken the Cincinnati Reds to the World Series against the vaunted New York Yankees in 1961. Unfortunately, they lost. He wasn't real pleased with the results, but knowing the way Fred was, that would just make him more determined to go back and to win it all.
He had felt a lump on his neck between Christmas and New Year's prior to the '64 season, and he flew out to Seattle so that his brother, his most trusted physician in his life, could check it out and see what was going on.
They did a biopsy, and I do remember my uncle looking at my dad and saying, "All right, let me know what it is and give it to me straight." And those boys, there was no nonsense in that family, and he looked at my uncle and said, "It's cancer, and it's inoperable."
There was quite a brave front through the whole 1964 season. Fred was managing, the team was doing quite well. It was in the hunt for the pennant until the very last day, and he progressively declined in his physical ability.
He was a sick man, and his determination was just absolutely remarkable. He was going to beat the disease. It was not going to get him, and he just kept going.
That last season was a profile in courage for Fred to even be out there at all and to take his team that far where they almost won the pennant.
As that year progressed, I think it became harder and harder on my father to watch what was happening. I think it was so devastating for him to see a brother that he was so fond of in this kind of a condition, and probably one that he couldn't do a lot of help alleviating.
Right around his birthday in August, he had to step down as the manager so that the team could go on without him. But he was there, he was there at the very last day of the season when they lost the game.
That was the last time I saw him, and gave me a great big hug and said, "I don't think we'll see each other again." And we never did, and it's very hard. My Uncle Fred passed away. It was so devastating to my father. And I think at that point, he decided that something had to be done. There had to be good that would come out of all this bad. And his vision at that time was to create a cancer center that would focus on the elimination of cancer and the suffering that it caused families.
I mean, imagine if you have a brother who is 9 years younger than you, who dies in his mid-40s, in the prime of his professional life. Bill was devastated, and this kind of pride and grief all at the same time motivated him to bring together forces in the community to bring about the Hutchinson Center.
They had such a dedication to their profession, Fred with his baseball and my father with his medicine. And to them, people were really the most important component of what they did. Fred was certainly a people person. People flocked to him, and he never, ever turned anyone away. And I think my father was also that way. He would listen to people for long periods of time and then offer great advice. He was a very wise man. I think both men were very wise, and I see that being carried on by the center. Is it the wisdom and the patience and the resolve to do something really, truly great.
Quality draws quality, and fierceness draws fierceness, and you can see it in the way that they pursue science and the way that they have become really the leading cancer center in the world.
When cancer touches one person, it touches a family, children, wives, sisters, mothers, and it's devastating. And we see it again and again and again. So for me, the Fred Hutch is a very human institution that really cares about people. And the science gets greater and greater because I think the people involved also care so much about making an impact on that human suffering. And I think Fred, had he lived beyond his 45 years, would have certainly had a major impact on baseball. I wish I could see that in reality, and it never, he was never allowed to get to that point, which is so sad. What a wonderful man.
Probably the most famous quote of Fred's is that sweat is your only salvation. In other words, you have to work hard. There's no other substitute for hard work. And this is the kind of thing that carries over into the Hutchinson Center itself.
Bill Hutchinson created a living monument to his brother with the hope that Fred Hutchinson's next victory would be the greatest, that cancer would be eliminated as a cause of human suffering and death. Dr. E. Donald Thomas shared that dream. 4 decades ago, working in the basement of temporary research facilities, he developed a radical new treatment procedure that would save the lives of tens of thousands of people and forever change the way we look at cancer.
Technicians were in short supply, and Dottie started working with me. That was in 1955 when we started working together. She's the boss here at home, and I'm the boss at the Hutch. When I became interested in leukemia, it was essentially a sentence of death, and there was essentially no treatment. We had patients on our hospital ward who were dying of leukemia and who needed something different to be done. And we reasoned that if we could give a radiation to a patient with leukemia, leukemic cells are known to be sensitive to radiation. And then if we could kill all the leukemic cells, the radiation required would be large enough to kill all the normal bone marrow also. But if we could transplant bone marrow to replace the bone marrow that had been destroyed, this might offer a way of treating leukemia. And at that time, the chemotherapy agents had not been developed, and so something like this was a radical idea. That's when we started to work in the dogs. We found very quickly that if we gave a dog lethal radiation, actually twice the lethal dose, but set the bone marrow aside before we did that and give it back to the dog after the radiation, they promptly recovered. But if we gave bone marrow from another dog, they became sick and died. That was the real beginning of the transplant program, and also the beginning of the Hutchinson Center, because Bill Hutchinson had come to me and said he had this vision of setting up a cancer center to honor his brother, and he would be delighted to have us work there.
Bill Hutchinson was the person who could push this forward. He really was a very dynamic figure, very popular surgeon here in Seattle, and when he wanted to get something done, he really accomplished it.
Other groups were attempting this too, and none of them had been successful. And this really led to the conclusion that we better stop doing this, that it was simply not going to work. But By that time, we had recognized in the dog that if we had the right tissue typing, we could have a much more favorable outcome. The graft often worked. So when we had reached the point where we could get 90% survival in these dogs, we resumed the human work. Sunday, I went to a little birthday luncheon for a girl named Tammy, who was 16 years old when she developed leukemia. And we did her graft in early 1972. She was the first truly long-term survivor. We have a little birthday party that coincides with her marrow transplant, and this was the 35th year for her. One night at about 3 a.m. the phone rang, and this was a reporter in New York who said, it's been announced in Sweden that you're going to win the Nobel Prize, and so, but he didn't know anything about bone marrow transplantation. I spent about 5 minutes telling him about it, and Dottie, who was trying to sleep during all this, said, when I hung up, said, "Why are you giving a lecture on bone marrow transplantation?" And I said, well, that was some reporter, unless it was one of my friends who is setting me up, who said that we were going to get the Nobel Prize. So she said, oh, and pulled the cover up, started to go back to sleep, and after about 30 seconds, she pulled the cover down and said, "What did you say?"
The prize was wonderful, but the really greatest thing of all of this, I think, is working with the patients and seeing what has happened and the difference that it has made. It's really, I think, for Don, a very rewarding and wonderful thing.
It's a much greater thrill for me than the Nobel Prize, obviously. But
for years, we knew every patient and patient's family.
Now there have been so many of them that since we're not working on the ward any longer, we can't keep up with all of them. But nevertheless, we feel that they're our children.
The successful bone marrow transplant is among the world's most significant medical advances, but the legacy of Bill and Fred Hutchinson does not stop there. It is kept alive by every person that joins the fight against cancer. People like Joan Macquarie, who survived both ovarian and breast cancer, thanks to early detection and the support of her identical twin sister, Jean Christ. Jean and Joan share the same genetic blueprint, which means that Jean may someday face her own battle with cancer. She's not waiting around. She's participating in a groundbreaking research study at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center that could help doctors diagnose certain cancers even before the first symptoms appear.
When things are, if things are tough, or even if they're not tough, having your twin with you just makes it better. And that's just the way it has always been.
When we were really little, Mom would hold me up to the mirror and say, "Who is that?" And I would point and say, "Joan." And when she'd hold Joan up to the mirror, Joan would point and say, "Jean."
We're both really passionate about sports. Usually we're together in those endeavors, and we're fiercely competitive. And Joan was always kind of a step ahead of me. She was a stronger runner than I was. She'd be, come on, and just really pushing me.
We were 49, and we were going to turn 50 at the end of that year. And we decided, wow, we're really going to train hard.
We'd always catch up with one another to do a couple of runs.
I was becoming more and more fatigued and having some symptoms, indigestion and gas, and things just weren't quite right. And Jean called me up one Saturday morning and said, "Come on, let's go for a run." And I said, I can't do it. I'm too fatigued. I just cannot get up. And she said, "Something really is wrong with you." And I started thinking, yeah, I think, she's right. And so I went in for my annual GYN exam, and she actually could feel that one of my ovaries was larger than the other one, and said, you know, they don't have to be the same size, but because you've complained of these symptoms, I think we should image this. She called me up after the scan and said, we can see a solid mass in your abdomen. And wow, all that I knew about cancer was that people died from it. And so it was terrifying. I knew I could depend on my body. It was very strong. And all of a sudden, my body had let me down. And it had a disease that, you know, I was assuming would probably take my life. She came walking towards me down the hallway, and I just knew right away something was really wrong. And she said that they'd found out that they'd diagnosed her with cancer, and it was a feeling like the ground was giving way. Very few women survive ovarian cancer. It's the deadliest of the gynecologic cancers. The vast majority of women with ovarian cancer are not diagnosed until late stage. In Joan's case, she had some of the best circumstances you can have with ovarian cancer, in that it was detected very, very early. I was healing from that surgery, and it was time for my annual mammogram, which showed that I had invasive breast cancer. And at that point, wow, it was so overwhelming. I had a very difficult time dealing with it. I had initially thought that cancer was a death sentence, and now I had received 2 of those diagnoses in just a matter of months. And so I was pretty sure that life as I knew it was going to change very rapidly. And it wasn't the type of change I was looking forward to. Cancer does not play by the rules. Joan was, you know, in that, I think, what you'd call a very healthy person. She was health-minded. But a diagnosis of cancer can happen to anyone when you're least expecting it. The surgeries took away a lot of what defined my gender, and all of those were very difficult to deal with. I had just started chemotherapy, and I knew that my hair was going to be falling out, and I wasn't looking forward to that at all. I didn't want that outward sign to the whole world that I had something going on. And so I was very concerned about it. And Mother's Day came along, and my niece came over, and I opened the door, and she stood there, and she had her head shaved. She had beautiful long hair down to her waist, and she had shaved her head, and she gave me her hair for Mother's Day so that I could make a hairpiece out of it. I started realizing how lucky I was. Both the breast cancer and the ovarian cancer were detected at early stages when they were very treatable. You know, I had Jean, she went to every scan and treatment, and every appointment I had, she was there by my side. And having her there, she was truly my strength and courage. And I don't know what I would have done without, without her by my side and helping me through that time. I had the opportunity to climb Mount Rainier with a group called Team Survivor Northwest. Day by day, I think we all got stronger and stronger. The night that we went on our summit attempt, I felt courageous. I felt like, you know, I've already climbed one mountain, and I know I can get to the top of this one too, just like I did the former mountain with cancer.
I wanted to climb that mountain. I wanted to stand on the top to prove to myself that I was healthy again. And I don't think anything was going to stop me. I was going to get up there no matter what. And wow, standing up there was truly life-changing. I thought, yes, I am healthy again. If you have a family history of ovarian cancer and breast cancer, you may be at risk yourself. Am I going to get cancer? Is that going to be part of my adventure in life? I started really worrying about Jean, because as identical twins, you know, we share our genes. And so that was very frightful for me to think that she may be one of those women who doesn't benefit from early detection.
The issue about cancer really is early detection. If you look at the statistics, currently about 64% of people will survive their disease 5 years, which is considered a cure. Nearly all of that 64% are people who are detected at early stages of cancer. That's really the crux of the matter, is to detect the disease early. There will be substances released by the cancer into our blood that can be detected. We think that a particularly informative component will be the proteins of the cell, because proteins are really what carry out the function of the cell, so they're much more related to what's going on. The challenge now will be to develop lists of proteins that are likely to be informative about cancer, probably by looking directly in the cancer tissue where they're abundant, and then developing very sensitive ways to measure them in the blood where they're very low abundance.
It was easy for me to support Joan in getting healthy, but overall, I felt like I wasn't doing enough. That's when I got involved in some early detection studies at the Fred Hutch.
The real challenge is, can you detect it before they know they have cancer? And so it's very hard to get samples from people before they have cancer, because, you know, how do we know who's going to have cancer? So in this case, these are people who have higher risk. And so with high-risk groups, we can collect samples earlier and follow them very carefully.
If I do ever present with breast cancer or ovarian cancer, they can go back in time and look at all those samples and see what changed. What should we be looking for? Someday, there's going to be a simple blood test that we can all have, and if there is something going on, we'll know about it early enough to take action and save women's lives. If I do present with cancer, I'll definitely know the ropes after, you know, being with Joan. I have the benefit of knowing the signs and symptoms. 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will be affected by cancer in their lifetime. Research is our hope. You know, it's our hope for the future.
Mother Teresa also said that we cannot do great things on this earth, only small things with great love. For a woman like Jean Chris, that means giving her blood to scientists and researchers so that they might realize the dream of Bill Hutchinson, a future without cancer. And that's not such a small thing after all. Thanks for joining us tonight on Full Focus.
When you're weary, feeling small, when tears are in your